Welcome to Manifested Publishers. We'll pick it on question 2. We'll read the question. We say that with an aid of a well-labeled diagram, explain the concept of production possibility frontier. That is PPF. We put it on the board. We say with that's 2A, with the aid of well-labeled diagram, explain the concept of production possibility frontier. Production possibility frontier. With the aid of a well-labeled diagram, explain the concept of production possibility frontier. That is PPF. That is PPF. With the aid of a well-labeled diagram, explain the concept of production possibility frontier. The first thing that we need to understand is that what is a PPF? A PPF, we need to understand, is a locus or point joining together different combination of two goods that can be produce an economy when resources are fully and efficiently utilized. So we have the diagram. On this other end, we can call it consumer goods. We can have down here producer goods. So we have our PPF. So there's a point along the PPF curve. We can call it P. We have Q. We have R. We have S. And then finally we have T at this. Then we have points that are inside the PPF curve. And then we have points that are basically outside the PPF curve. So very important is to understand that this is the PPF curve. This is the PPF curve. And to the core, we need to understand what basically happens at each and every point of the PPF curve. The first point is the point on the PPF curve. So we say that P, Q, R, S, and T, we say represents, those ones basically represents attainable with the country, with the country's level of resources, with the country's level of resources, with the country levels of resources, and technology, assuming that the resources have been basically have been fully employed. That is attainable. So we can look at a point that is point N, that is into bracket outside. We call it outside the PPF curve point. That is outside the PPF curve. A point that is outside the PPF curve. A point that is N outside cannot be attained. That one cannot be attained with the given, we say with the given level of resources, with a given level of resources and technology. technology. So that point that is outside the PPF curve, that is N is unattainable. Then we have point M, that is inside. We call it inside the PPF curve. That is a point that is basically inside the PPF curve. So represent, this is basically represents, we say represents unemployment. Unemployment represents unemployment. That point basically inside represent unemployment or inefficient or inefficient use of resources or inefficient use of resources. Just to emphasize what we have done, we say that number one, that the PPF curve is a locus of point joining together two different combinations of goods that can be produced by a farm when resources are fully and efficiently utilized. So we have the points that are on PPF curve. Those points are attainable with the country levels of resources and technology, assuming that resources are being fully employed and no wastage. And no wastage. We need to and no wastage. And no wastage. And no wastage. Assuming that resources have been fully employed and there's no wastage. The second one is the M. That is the point that is outside the PPF curve. We say it cannot be attained with a given level of resource and technology. Then we know that the point that is inside the PPF curve, that basically represents unemployment or efficient use of the resources, inefficient use of resources. Some of the areas that as learners need to maybe be emphasized on is uses of the PPF curve. You know, as you look at that question, one of the things that needs to come into your mind is what are the uses of PPF curve? What are the uses of where do we apply the PPF curve? That is a good area that learners need to actually emphasize on, and that is how we tackle that question. That is question 2, Roman A. Question 2, Roman B. Argue 3 cases in favor of foreign direct investment, that is FDI, in least developed countries. We put it down. We say B, that is 2B. Argue 3 cases. 3 cases in favor of foreign direct investment, into bracket FDI, in least developed countries. On that particular question, one of the first things that needs to be understood is what is the FDI? That is a direct investment by a host country in the productive asset of a foreign country. So in this case, for example, you have countries investing in productive assets in the least developing countries. So what are arguments in favor? When you talk about arguments in favor, we are basically talking about advantages of the FDI in the least developing countries. One of the first advantage that we know that fill the gap in resources, fill the resource gap in least developed countries. Number one, fill the gap, fill the resource gap in the least developed countries. In the least developed countries, fill the resource gap in the least developed countries. The second advantage or in favor of FDI, we basically talk about promote creation of employment, promote creation, what we call creation creation of employment, promote creation of employment in the, we say, in the least developed countries. In the least developed countries. Number 3, we can talk about promote investment. What you call promote investment. Promote investment in the least developed countries. We say number 4, we can talk about promote transfer. Promote transfer of technology, transfer of the technology through skill transfer, through the skills transfer, through the skills transfer. So promote what you call technology through the transfer of the skills. But apart from that very question that we've talked about, we can also look at, as learners, you can also look at areas, for example, factors that will promote FDIs in the developing countries. Again, an examiner could also ask on the next maybe exam that are to come in the future, arguments against now the disadvantages of FDI. So those are some of the areas that needs also to be assessed by learners, needs also to be looked at by the learners. That is how we tackle that question. That is question 2, Roman B. We pick it on the next question, that is question 2, Roman C. C, Roman 1, explain the term consumer equilibrium. So say we write the question, that is C, Roman 1, explain the term consumer equilibrium. Explain the term consumer equilibrium. When you talk about consumer equilibrium, we basically say that consumer equilibrium is a point where the budget line is basically tangent to the indifference curve. So consumer equilibrium is the point where the budget line is tangent to the indifference curve, where the budget line is basically tangent to the indifference curve. We say that consumer equilibrium is a point where the budget line is basically tangent to the indifference curve. Key things that we are able to establish when we are defining, or when we draw, or when we look at consumer equilibrium, because we have two commodities, that is on the y-axis could have good y, on the x-axis we could have good x. So at that very point we are able to establish equilibrium quantity of good y, and at the same time we are also able to establish the equilibrium quantity of the good x. That is how we go about that question. We pick it again on question 2, Roman C, that is C, Roman 2. Using a well-labeled diagram, using a well-labeled diagram of indifference curve, illustrate the consumer equilibrium position. Illustrate the consumer equilibrium position. So we draw that consumer equilibrium position. So we have it on this other end. Consumer equilibrium position, we can have the budget line. First of all, the budget line, we call this A, and we call that B. We call that A, and we call that B. We have indifference curve 1, so that is IC1. We have indifference curve 2, that is IC2. We have indifference curve 3, that is IC3. We have indifference curve 4, that is the IC4. So where is the consumer equilibrium? It is basically established at indifference curve 2. Basically established at indifference curve 2. So this is good Y on this end. I have good X on this. So I have XE on this, then I have basically YE at that very point. So we have established equilibrium position. So we know that IC1 to IC3, IC1 to IC3, IC1 to IC4, IC1 to IC4 is the indifference curve. Then you have here is E, indifference curve. We have that as the indifference curve. We know that point E is what you call consumer equilibrium. We call it consumer equilibrium point. That is E is what you call consumer equilibrium point. And then we are also able to have YE, equilibrium quantity of Y. Then XE, that is equilibrium quantity. We call it quantity of X. Equilibrium quantity of X. We know that that is equilibrium quantity of X. Equilibrium quantity of X, that is for XE. Something that we also need to establish, we need to understand that AB is basically the budget line. AB is basically what you call the budget line. So the explanation, we need to understand that a consumer will always want to be at higher indifference curve. If you look at that, consumer will definitely would want to be a consumer will always want to be at higher indifference, what you call the higher indifference curve, because we know that because there is higher what you call higher satisfaction. And the point that we know that E the consumer equilibrium position, and we find it at IC2. E at IC2, consumer equilibrium position, where the budgeter line is tangent to indifference curve 2, where the budget line is basically tangent to the indifference curve 2. So when you look at that, this particular question, one of the things that we are able to establish, is that one thing, the first part is the diagram. Though the diagram indicate what each level means, so together we've drawn the diagram, we've indicated, and we've also shown the equilibrium position that the examiner require, and we've also explained that point and what happens to the indifference curve and why a consumer would want to be at a high indifference curve. We know that the higher the indifference curve, the higher the level of satisfaction. That is how we approach that very question. We pick it on question 2, that is Roman D. summarize 4 types of unemployment in least developed countries. So that is D, summarize. Summarize 4 types of unemployment in least developed countries. Least developed countries. So the first thing that we need to understand is to understand the question, what is unemployment? And the second thing is least developed countries. So whenever we talk about unemployment, is a scenario where we have people who have the qualification to work and are willing to work, but there is not employment. Least developed countries, these are countries that are not yet there in terms of at higher level of development. That is what we call least development countries. So what are these type of unemployment that are there in least developed countries? One of it we can talk about open unemployment or naked. Naked, open, stroke, naked unemployment. Naked unemployment. Naked unemployment. So whenever we talk about naked unemployment, we're basically saying that people are willing to work, but there's no work to do. People are willing to work, but basically there's no work to do. And that we experience in least developed country. That is to say, this is a condition in which people have no work to do. This is a conditions in which people have no work to do. They are willing and able to work, but there is no work. There is no work to do. There is no work basically to do. So we proceed to what we call the second one, what we call structural unemployment. We said that on the structural unemployment, these are what we call due to structural changes. What are these structural changes? Change in demand, change in taste, and change in fashion would cause unemployment. So we have it what we call structural unemployment. Structural unemployment. We say this is due to the structural. This is due to the structural changes. Structural changes in the economy. Structural changes in the economy. Structural changes in the economy. We say, for example, changes in fashion, tastes, and demand. These are some of the factors that we find that in a least developed country would cause unemployment. That is a structural unemployment. We proceed to the next. The next we can call it, we can have what we call unproductive. What we call number 3, unproductive. We call it the unproductive unemployment. We call it the unproductive unemployment as one of the unemployment that occurs in least developing countries. So when you talk about unproductive, workers do not have necessary tools of work. As a type of employment, it occurs as a result of workers not having necessary tools to work. Occurs when workers do not have what we call necessary necessary tools of work. Necessary tools of work. When workers do not have necessary tools of work. We can have the 4. 4, we can call it seasonal. Seasonal unemployment. Seasonal unemployment. So whenever we talk about seasonal unemployment, we are basically looking at temporary. When we talk about type of unemployment, we know that results from temporary. The word is temporary. Results from temporary work. Results from the temporary work. Results from the temporary work. For example, where do we get them? Construction. Where do we get them? I.e., when you talk about seasonal is common changes in season, not temporary, but that should be change in the season. Change in the season, not temporary. Temporary should be casual. This we call it due to changes in the seasons. For example, we say tourism, where we have a peak and off-peak seasons, where we have peak season and then we have off-peak season. So where we know that, for example, the periods, when you talk about, for example, periods that are peak season, where we know that there's a lot of employment. Peak season and off season. Peak season, there is employment, especially the December. Peak season, there is employment, and off-peak season, off-peak seasons, there is unemployment. There is unemployment that in tourism sector. That is what you call seasonal unemployment, that we basically experience what you call off-peak season. We can have the last one. We just discussed the last one. Casual unemployment as one of unemployment. Casual unemployment as one of the type of unemployment that we basically experience. In the least developed countries. These are temporary. We call it temporary employment. For example, i.e., in the construction, we call it in the construction sector. So when you talk about constructions of road, this, remember, basically a casual employment where you have them for a particular time. They're very temporal. And after that time, the individuals that are basically engaged in such works will definitely lose the work. Lose the work. And as we conclude on that, key areas that learners need to assess. You need to look at why is unemployment a major policy issue in the least developing countries. What causes unemployment? What causes unemployment? What is the relationship between unemployment and relationship? That is the Phillips curve. That's also a very good area that learners or those that are particularly preparing for exam need to look at. And that is how we assess that very question.